They were trauma survivors, incest survivors, and they were really profoundly struggling with self-harm. That it was manipulative and masochistic, and these women didn't strike me like that at all. And then I found Eugene'a Gendlina's work in focusing, and he's the father of the felt sense. And that really gave me the ability to help people to come into the body, which of course is very scary and not a good thing to do when you're really dysregulated inside. But it was really polyvagal theory that helped me to name what was going on physically in the body. And neuroceptions is like just a beautiful unconscious process of, am I safe? Am I not safe? It was really a journey of trying to figure things out in a way that defied the traditional pathologizing model.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
I'm here at the Poczdamie Polyvagal Conference 2024, and I have the joy and the honor to be with Jan Winhall today. Jan, thank you for being here with us.
It's a pleasure.
You've been one of the very first who brought polyvagal into a therapeutic practice, and you've built a special model combining felt sense of Gendlina and polyvagal, so the felt sense polyvagal model. Can you tell us a little bit of the story of this model, how you bumped into that and how you arrived here?
Oh, yeah. So first, I went hunting to try to figure out why women that I was working with in a group over 40 years ago were really struggling so much with, they were trauma survivors, incest survivors, and they were really profoundly struggling with self-harm. And I couldn't figure it out, and the traditional kind of pathologizing model was really derogatory towards them, that it was manipulative and masochistic, and these women didn't strike me like that at all. And so I went on a journey to try to figure it out. And the first sort of people that helped were the feminist therapists who had, I think, a really wonderful depathologizing way of understanding women and being more in the body in terms of trying to figure out what was going on physically too in the body. And then I found Eugene'a Gendlina's work in focusing, and he's the father of the felt sense. And that really gave me the ability to help people to come into the body, which of course is very scary and not a good thing to do when you're really dysregulated inside. And back then we didn't talk about the nervous system so much, but we talked about numbing and flooding. And so as I just continued to search and try to figure out what was going on with self-harm and addiction, I found Steve Porges's back in 2012 and Dan Siegel's work. We went to a conference, and so I started reading about Steve, and then it really began to make sense. And also Judith Herman, who actually did talk about the nervous system, but we didn't really pick it up back then. I think because she was a medical doctor as well, she had that knowledge of the physiology in the body. But it was really polyvagal theory that helped me to name what was going on physically in the body, and in terms of what we now call, with numbing, the dorsal branch of the vagus, the shutting down place that we could see in the survivors that we were working with. So I brought those two models together, and basically the felt sense polyvagal model gives people a way to bring in interoception, so intuitive processing in felt sensing, and Steve's term neuroception for figuring out, for knowing where we are and what's happening and how we keep our bodies safe. And neuroceptions is like just a beautiful unconscious process of, am I safe? Am I not safe? Where am I now in my body? And so that's how I brought those two things together. It was really a journey of trying to figure things out in a way that defied the traditional pathologizing model.
Would you say your life really changed, your personal life really changed with polyvagal theory?
Yes, in part because of the opportunities that were given to me in meeting Steve Porges and then writing my book. And I've often said to him, "You changed my life." And he'll say, "Jan, you know, you guys all changed my life." It's bi-directional. And yes, so absolutely. And also just in being clearer about understanding at least some of what we can figure out about neuroscience, because we're not neuroscientists. But yeah, understanding how bodies work and why we respond the ways that we do, and often unconsciously. And that shifts the paradigm, because then you begin to see that these ways of behaving, like with addictions, are really, survival driven. They're all about shifting states from that anxious flight-fight place in the body into shutting down and numbing, or going the other way. So that's how we see self-harm and addictions through a polyvagal lens. They're survival strategies, they're adaptive ways of coping with life when life is unbearable. And isn't that amazing? That bodies know how to do that? I mean, it makes you feel, I think, very positive about how we're designed in our bodies and how amazing that is. And we miss it all when we just pathologize it and say these behaviors are maladaptive. They're not maladaptive at all. They're quite the opposite.
That's kind of new. You've been a few who have worked in addiction, and it's kind of new to say, well, the addiction is really trying to help you.
Yeah, it's very new.
And it's really the opposite, like fighting against the addiction goes nowhere.
You just end up in a power struggle. And there's no way that we're saying that addictions are positive. But because they harm you in the long run, and there's no question about that. And that's part of our job, is to help people with that. But when you shift the frame from the horrible shaming that is done in our culture, and I think part of that has to do with a kind of hyper-masculine culture that we live in. We're not supposed to be dependent. We're not supposed to need anything, which is crazy. And in the state of addiction, you're very dependent. You can't cope without this thing, whatever that is, right? That's helping you to survive. And that's a nasty place to be. But the key really is through polyvagal lens is that it is absolutely the best place to be if you don't have, or you don't perceive you have enough safety. So we're designed to survive at all costs.
And the cost is heavy.
The cost is heavy. Yeah. But when you can give this gift to people, I call it these moments of liberation, because it really, truly does help people to let go of the horrible shaming that's done in our culture, and probably across the world. I mean, some indigenous cultures get it. They actually call addictions medicines, which sounds crazy, but it isn't crazy when you see it through a nervous system lens. Yeah.
Some people say that it's their medicine. It helps them cope with social relationship. It helps them with solitude. It helps, and we can really hear that from some people who are struggling with addiction.
Yeah, well, it does help them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. But I like a really simple definition. Addictions help you in the short term, and they hurt you in the long term, and you can't stop doing them. Even if you can stop for periods of time, some people are confused around that. They'll say, well, I can stop. Well, yeah, but when you start again, are you in that same stuck cycle? So that's the binging, right? Rather than the everyday use. But it's still a big problem. And it's a pervasive problem in the world. It's really scary.
What are the main steps to work with addiction?
I think that piece around psychoeducation is crucial. The first piece is making the relationship. But part of it is that it's when the therapist or the coach or knows that you can give to a person, listen, you're just trying to survive, just trying to get through the night. I get it. And not only do I get it, but I can tell you why from a very strongly based neurophysiology. We understand it. You know, when I first talked to Steve Porges about addictions, he says to me, oh yeah, I've always thought of addictions as state regulation strategies. I'm like, oh God, it's music to my ears. State regulation strategies. How to regulate your state, right? Back and forth, but in a very traumatized feedback loop because there's no grounded ventral energy there. So you don't know how to regulate your state. So I have a graphic model that I use because I love imagery and bodies love color and shape. And it's fun to understand your body. And so we teach people a lot about that. And then the other part is, and people then begin to feel respected. Oh my God, this person actually understands and can teach me something about why I'm doing these things that most of the time I hate doing. And sometimes they're not pleasurable anymore because you've done them so often, but you're stuck in a horrible rut. And we can explain that too through neuroplasticity. So it's a very hopeful model because we know that the more you engage in neural exercises, so things like what we're doing now, really connecting and I know you and making connection and social engagement with other people, and also practices like a focusing practice where you can slow things down and teach people how to come inside and how to connect with themselves.
That might be the most scary thing because
Yeah.
usually addiction prevents us from
Yes.
feeling anything.
Yeah, that's the idea, because feeling is too threatening. So that's why we teach people how to do that. And we experience that with people through focusing partnerships often. And I have a new book coming out where it's basically a manual for the general public to move through these embodied steps in terms of connecting with what you are feeling inside. And of course, that's titrated. You go slowly. But when you go slowly in relationship with other people and you feel respected, you feel a sense of dignity because there's not something horrible about you. You just learned how to survive. That's how bodies work. And you do these practices together, there's a tremendous amount of what we call co-regulation. People feel safe together if they feel their sense of respect and dignity. And ultimately, we want to connect. We're wired to connect. We're social beings. So we're working with, even though it might not look like that, we know when we educate ourselves about polyvagal theory, and focusing, Gendlin's thought the same thing, that we are designed to connect and carry forward. And he would say, you know, when you give the body what it needs, it knows how to carry forward. But of course, it becomes paradoxical because in the state of addiction, you avoid, you isolate, right? And your primary attachment is the thing that's keeping you alive. So that's tricky. But it's not that tricky if you start slowly making the relationship, restoring a sense of dignity, or creating together, and feeling close and connected. And then helping somebody to begin to notice what is going on in their body. And that's a very special moment when you can see that the person's ready, and you might see a little tear, you know, or a kind of tightening in the throat. And if you feel that sense of warmth and connection, then the therapist can say, you know, I notice there's a little tear there. And, you know, and people might not even know it's there at first. But then they start to feel into a connection with themselves. And we first start with grounding and connecting with something that feels manageable. Even if it's just this moment with you and me, which might be the first time they felt something more intensely in years, decades. And then when you bring in other folks that are struggling with the same stuff and you teach them how to listen to each other in this embodied felt sense way, it's magic.
So you would say that the most efficient way would be to do that in groups.
Yes.
It's better than individual.
Initially, people often won't do it. But so you start where they are. And so often we start with people on their own to just begin to get a bit of a sense of restoring or beginning to find a sense of dignity and respect and connection. But as soon as that starts to happen, I really encourage people to go into groups, because that's where it's like you're connecting and co-regulating. It's a little turbo engine. It just is so much more powerful when people can see, wow, I was doing that too. And wow, that person's stuck where I am. But from over here, I can see that they've got a problem. When I'm with me, I'm fine. Like, I'm not changing. But I can see that it's not working for them and it's not working for me. And then they make a connection. And through the strength of that connection and that warmth and respect, they begin to build something that feels safer and more trusting, and they can come out and be more alive, right? Because it's the dampening down of the aliveness that is so sad and yet so needed.
And usually, oftentimes, addiction, the substance is, that's Gabor Mate who said that it's your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the only thing you can really have a connection to or you can rely on.
Yes.
And it's hard to go from that very strong connection to a human connection that can be unpredictable,
Yeah.
where you can find shaming, judgmental thoughts, etc. So this really transition from I'm alone with my substance to I'm connected to others. It's pretty hard. It's a pretty hard journey.
It is. It's a really hard journey. And especially if you've been, in that addicted state for decades, as lots of people have. But what I'm always struck with is a very strong tenet in polyvagal theory and focusing. Gendlina would say, life wants to live. And Steve would say, we're wired to connect, right? And you see that. And it actually, Florence, it doesn't take that long, because for a lot of people, for some it does, but there is this innate desire to feel warm and safe. It's in all of us. It's how we survive and function in the world. We need that so desperately. And so often I find when you can really release the shame a lot around that and give people a very clear way, steps to do it, you're right? This is how you do it. First, you start with this a little bit and also just slowing down, so we don't go, whoop, you got to go inside. It's like, well, what do you notice around the room that's kind of interesting? There's Mark over there. Okay, and then so you're teaching people literally how to slow down and attend to something that doesn't feel very scary or risky, right? Like the lamp in the corner. That's the beginning. Slowing down. And then you build on that. So there's the lamp in the corner, and there's the light, and there's your beautiful blouse. And then you start to build on that too. And I'm aware of sitting in the chair. There we go. Now we're starting to move into the body. And if that gets scary, then you go back to the lamp. You do it slowly over time. But doing it also with other people who are in the same boat you're in, it just accelerates the process. And the other side of that is that we have to be really patient. because it doesn't happen overnight. It's years. It's years. But in those years, you build in joy and fun and pleasure and calm. And so it's not like all a horrible journey. It's a journey of coming out, and you get scared. And so you have to go back in a little bit, but you come back out. It's the titrating or the rocking back and forth, you know. And people slip and fall and all that. That's fine. That's what bodies are doing. We just try to kind of figure out when that happens. Well, what was going on for you? Well, my mother died. Oh, yeah, well, no wonder your body went back to drinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's way too much to cope with right now. And that release is like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, but many people lose their mother or father or people, their loved ones, and they don't go to addiction. So what would you say when someone says that?
I would say, yeah, that's really great. They've had enough safety in their life that their body doesn't need to. It's as simple as that, really. It's not that complicated. It's like, well, your body doesn't feel safe enough to stay present right now. And so that's what happened. And let's keep going. Let's just keep going. Because the more we keep going, the more connected you feel to people and form trusting relationships. And we teach people how to do that in community. So it's all about creating communities, which I love doing. And I'm pretty good at it over the years,
you are.
it seems. We have a beautiful community in the Felt Sense Polyvagal community. Yeah.
We only have 1 or 2 minutes. I know you have 2 books. Do you want to tell a few words on your books? And the last one, who's going to be released in a few weeks or months?
Yeah. So the first one I wrote basically about the model, treating trauma and addiction with the Felt Sense Polyvagal model. And that came out in 2021. And so the training program that I do on the Polyvagal Institute is, and the teaching is about that model and just what we talked about. And then my new book comes out next March with Norton, and it's 20 embodied practices for healing trauma and addiction using the Felt Sense Polyvagal model. It's a big mouthful, but 20 embodied practices. So it's really a manual for my book. So the clinician has the book, and then the client can read the manual, and it's designed to do together in partnership. So we work in focusing partnerships and with a therapist, ideally in groups. So we're going to be starting up those groups next March, and I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing a little bit of your passion and your hope for everyone. Thank you for your communicating joy. And for this wonderful connection, and that I'm sure everybody will feel that sense of connection and get a little bit of what the Felt Sense Polyvagal model is and what polyvagal theory brings to the world. Everyone, not only addiction, but everyone. Thank you, Jen. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.